people that it's as if their only objective in life is to derail believers. So they have a lot of time on their hands. And they find different creative ways to say the same useless things. Your sin does not matter. And the Old Testament. And then they find all kinds of ways to try to discredit, as it were, the New Testament teachings of Jesus, because they don't like it. And when you push them, you realize that that's actually what the issue is. Let me tell you this. If you approach scripture with an agenda, you will always be wrong. 10 out of 10 times, you will be wrong. If you have an agenda that you bring to the script, you will be wrong. 10 out of 10 times. And a close relative of that is that if you have an agenda, it's not hard to find passages that you can tweak to help you say the thing that you want to say. So when people pitch the apostles against Jesus, it's a very foolish thing to do. Say, Jesus said, forgive us as we forgive those who trespass against us. And then Paul said, for God had forgiven us for Christ's sake. And that God, the Bible now says we should forgive others because we have been forgiven. So it is not we should forgive so that we can be forgiven. But that Paul actually said we should forgive because we have been forgiven. They think that a faithful Christian will be to say, it looks like there's a contradiction between this and this. So in what way are these two things not contradictory? Because both of them belong in the same milieu, and that milieu is called the gospel. That's what a faithful Christian will do. It's not to say, let's cancel this one, let's hold this one. Because just as some people will want to cancel Jesus and, in quote, and take what they think they understand Paul to be saying, other people will want to cancel Paul. They'll say, if Jesus says something and Paul says a different thing, who will you rather believe? Who will you rather believe? It's laziness. But many times things are more sinister than that. The teachings of Paul cannot lead you into error because Paul is an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God. Why it looks as if sometimes there's apparent contradiction between some of the statements of the apostles and the things that Jesus taught. Things like maybe forgiveness of sins. Even things like salvation. Because there's a tendency for you to think that Jesus Christ taught salvation by works. But it's not true. All of the salvific parables of Jesus, the cross is very evident in them. But if you do not situate them in the context of the Jewish audience that he was speaking to, you may miss the cross. So some people have come to attribute innovations to Paul. That Paul innovated and distorted the message of Jesus and founded something. And because he was so vocal and expressive, he has literally hijacked Christianity in a way that is a derailment from what Jesus sought to establish. And then other people will come up and say, Jesus Christ was actually part of the Old Testament. So they will put Paul on the stage. Other people will throw Paul away and put Jesus on the stage. And I need you to know that in that regard, as far as this thing is concerned, both the Damina and the Suleiman camp are wrong. You can quote me on this one. There is harmony between the epistles and the gospels. Because the same God inspired both. And the same God was working through both. And what God has joined together, let neither Damina nor Suleiman put asunder. Hebrews 9 is so detailed and said it in so many different ways that while the testator is alive, the testament is not of effect. While he's alive. That the testament comes into effect after the death of the testator. It's clear. Then he goes on to give us the example of how it happened even in the First Testament. And in the sequence, Moses read it out before applying blood. Then we went to Exodus and we saw that Moses read it out after writing it in a book and then read it out. The people made their own commitment and they say, we will be obedient. Then Moses applied blood. This is what the passage says. It's not my interpretation. Then Jesus said, God anointed me to preach the gospel. Jesus said to the disciples of John, the gospel is being preached to the poor. Are you there? Then Hebrews said, this salvation at the first began to be spoken by the Lord. So I'm not the one who is trying to interpret scripture to make it say that Jesus preached the gospel. It is from the lips of Jesus. That's what I mean by there's no rhema here. So if anybody tells you that you need to go to the epistles to understand the gospel, the person is wrong. And I'm saying it doesn't matter how many degrees you have, whether or if they gave it to you from a seminary. Nonsense is nonsense, irrespective of who is saying it. And then if you now wake up to now say, hey, Paul said this one, Paul is aberrant, people can use Paul, and if you follow Paul, so God told you. It wasn't God. God didn't tell you to forget about the teachings of Paul. It was not God. Whoever you heard was not God. And I don't need to be there. It wasn't God you heard. The Bible said these things were spoken by the Lord, and it was confirmed to us by them that heard him. Are you with me? And when Paul came, the people that heard Jesus, Paul went and met them, and when they considered what Paul was doing, they gave Paul the right hand of fellowship. And they said, the labor is vast, so let's distribute the field. You go to the Gentiles, we go to the Jews. But the gospel, the message is the same. Those were the people that walked with Jesus, they ate with Jesus, they slept with Jesus. So which God told you to forget about Paul? You didn't hear God. Let God be true, and let all men, if they like, let them be liars. So what a reasonable person will do if you see apparent contradiction is to put in the hard work to find out the harmony that may not be apparent but is present, because it is there. That's what a faithful Christian will do. You will not pitch one against the other, because God is not bipolar. Holy men spoke as they were moved, as they were carried along by the Spirit of God. All scripture is given by inspiration. The same God breathed out the Pauline epistles. The same God breathed out the Petrine epistles, the Johannine corpus. The same God breathed out the gospels. All scripture is given by inspiration.